again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Ilya able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Bring in the fans, 1-1. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
Oh, sorry. I figured since you were psychic, you knew what I was going to say.
No.
Because apparently you're a psychic now.
No, I was going to see how long this bit could run, where last show I waited for your intro or your thought of the thought of the episode and it didn't come.
Sure.
For the first time it didn't come. And then I was like, you know what, I'll wait this time. Didn't come.
Just getting waited out? No. Well, I just, again, like I said, like, you telling everybody that you're psychic and you're an insider, so I was just curious if your sources had told you what I was going to say or not.
I swear, man, that there was no thought behind that pick other than this is my research. We're talking about the Austin Matthews contract extension, everybody, by the way. I was out of the loop. I've been out of the loop for like a good couple weeks, but I was very out of the loop today. And Steven informed me that Austin Matthews was about to sign a contract. And we were kind of making our bets for what the contract could look like. And you had, 14 flat was your...
I had 14 flat, yeah. I figured it would be 6 or 7 by 14.
And the extent of my research was I'm going to look at who has the highest cap hit in the league right now. And I'm just going to kind of go slightly above that. So I went on Cap Friendly. I looked, and obviously McKinnon's won at, I think, at the 12.6, and McDavid's just behind that. And I was like, okay, like I'm not going to go to 14 because I feel like that's might be a bit high. And then I was sitting somewhere around. It's going to be above 13. Like he's gonna be over the 12 mark. It's going to be higher than McKinnon, but I don't think it's going to be that much higher. He's going to try and make it team friendly, if you want to call it that, for the Leafs, even though it's not. It's the highest, most expensive contract in the league. And I was bouncing between 13.5 and 13.25, and I was like,
I'm going to tweet out our conversation for people so they can see it.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go 13.25. And then 6 minutes later, it apparently gets announced by everybody, and I was still out of the loop. I was like, I think I was making dinner or something at the time, and you were messaging me like, what the fuck? And I was like, what, did I get it? And I wouldn't and checked, and lo and behold, it was a 4 by 13.25.
So the thing that made it perfect is I hadn't seen that you had already replied. So I saw the amount, and then I went to my phone and opened it and saw it, and I was like, oh, that's funny. Like, good bit. Like, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, you're like, no. You're like, no, that's like legitimately my guess. I haven't seen it. Was I right? And I was like, get the fuck out of here.
Man, I just I had my inside intuition, and I made a completely random guess with no thought behind it. So I'll take the W though.
I would, man. That's beautiful. That's like maybe my greatest ever shot in the dark called it was when I called the James Wisniewski trade when they picked him up from Columbus. I have never been more proud of myself because I was like, it just makes sense. Like, he's perfect. Like, he's exactly. And then Bruce refused to fucking play him because he was injured and stuff.
I was pumped about that trade when it happened. I got myself pretty pumped about that. I'm still bummed about how that one
that should have gone better than it did. It really should have. That was a bummer.
Because he was tearing it up for a while, or not like an all-star level, but he was fairly good.
He was a really good second pair defenseman who you could play on your top pair if you like.
Because that was a William Karlsson trade, was it not? Going the other way.
Yeah, William Karlsson and Rene Bourque.
And it was. I remember I think at the time it was either him or Raquel that they were deciding between, and they kept Raquel.
Those were the two. Yeah, and they kept Raquel. And because they had the two young Swedish centers, and then they ended up moving Raquel to wing, which has worked out for him. and worked out for the team for a couple of years. Like nothing against the decision. And then they moved Carlson to get Wiz, and then at the draft that year, which I believe was the same draft, they traded Palmieri for 2 picks and traded for Carl Hagelin. They traded Wiz to Carolina and got Anton Khudobin. Because I remember waking up and looking, and it's like the Ducks have traded James Wisniewski to Carolina for Anton Khudobin. I was like, what the fuck? So, yeah. Anyways, that's a fun little trip down memory lane.
Yeah. You know what? This, I'd have to go back, but I have to think this is the most action-packed, news-filled August podcast we've ever had. We've got lots. And you know what? It's typical fashion of the podcast that a few of these things broke a couple days after our last episode was recorded and released, with Terry's extension and Lundstrom's injury update. And then we've kind of just had some, trickled bits of news. We had a trade, a couple other signings, some Pat Verbeek comments, and some rumors. Maybe not like direct rumors surrounding the Ducks, but just some that have popped up. And then a bunch of NHL stuff we already mentioned and kind of went over the Matthews contract. But Erik Karlsson got traded to the Penguins. And Brandon Hagel haggled his way into an absurd contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning somehow.
Which, good for him. And it's in the thing. So we can do kind of the around the league news and notes first, real quick, I guess. So I guess, let's just do the Brandon Hagel thing because that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
I was so surprised by that number, but I was honest. Hey, somebody has a problem with something outside in the hallway. I apologize.
He's just as upset with the Brandon Hagel trade. Contract.
He thinks it's absurd. So, but almost more surprising to me was all of the people praising it. Because it completely caught me off guard that he would get 8 by 6.5, especially after we just saw them do 8-year extensions for Cirelli and Sergachev last summer. So I was 100% not expecting it. All of his underlying numbers are strong. People I know who, watch Tampa are confident in his ability to be a meaningful top 6 contributor. I think, if I was guessing, I would say he's kind of maybe going to be their new Alex Killorn is kind of what they're expecting him to be, which is not necessarily a play driver, but a meaningful contributor to a top 6 role who can play with, some of their other skilled players. And then the other thing is this is Stamkos's last year. Well, this is the last year of his current contract.
Yeah.
And I am very curious to see what happens with him when this contract is up, because he could probably sign another 2 or 3 year deal for $4 or $5 million. And it'll be really interesting to see kind of what happens with all of that. But
he's coming home.
For guys to get paid.
He's coming home to Toronto.
Oh God, could you imagine?
Because they just need another aging former superstar goal scorer. They just need another. So he's coming home. I bet he has a picture out there somewhere in Leafs pajamas. And
why wouldn't he?
Yeah, and he's going to replace Willie Nylander. So
yeah. So what was your thought on the Matthews contract, with it only being 4 years, and then him jumping Nathan McKinnon for the highest cap hit? McKinnon's going to go from the bargain deal to a single year as the highest paid player in the NHL.
Yeah, I figured he'd get to that mark of being the highest paid player. Not significantly higher. Obviously, I got lucky with the guess of being where it was going to be around, but I figured it'd be somewhere in that 13 to 14 range is where it would fall in. A bit surprised by the 4 years. If you had asked me to guess term, I don't think 4 would have been my answer. I probably would have leaned close to 5 or 6, or something shorter on a 2-year deal. 4 is definitely not what would have been one of my first guesses to go with. But listen, it gives him a bit more flexibility. He's 25 now, I think, or is he still younger than that? So this takes him.
That sounds right.
Takes him to 30.
Let's go to their cap-friendly page, which has all the information we need. My fat thumb can't hit the tiny button. Austin Matthews is 25, September 17th, so he'll be 26.
Okay, so this
So
takes
this will
him
take him to his
to
age
30.
30 season.
Yeah. So I feel, I mean, listen, it's good for the player. I think it's probably the best deal he could sign term-wise because it gives him 4 years with Toronto, which is about probably their window when you look at some of the guys they have in the contracts they've signed to really try and win it in Toronto. And I do believe he does want to win a Stanley Cup and be successful in Toronto, but then he's got a chance to still have, you know, a good contract to sign at 30. And obviously a lot of the talk with Matthews outside of Toronto has been, is he eventually going to go home to Arizona? You would have to imagine that their window and what they're building right now, that starts around that time as well, right? Is when in, you know, a 4 or 5 year window when you've got Logan Cooley stepping up and a lot of the prospects that they've just drafted in the last couple of drafts are starting to either become superstars or meaningful impact players, and it gives him the opportunity to look at that and bounce from one successful or run with a successful team in Toronto and having a shot at the Stanley Cup to maybe bounce to a younger team and be kind of a leader and an impact player on that team. I'm not to say that's going to be the case, but it sets him up to potentially do that, right? So I think it's the best of both worlds. I don't think Leafs fans can be upset with it because he easily could have just not signed a new deal and left and had to get traded out, and the Leafs would have found themselves in a Matthew Tkachuk type situation where they don't get exactly what they want for a superstar player, and then he goes somewhere else and lights it up. So I think it does now give Leafs fans, I think, a concrete, we have this amount of time to win. We've got 4 years to win it.
Absolutely.
And if they can't do anything in 4 years, I think he's gone. There's no reason for him to sign another contract in Toronto if things don't go well over the next 4 years.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. I think that, I hadn't really considered it with the Arizona timeline, but, if they can get a new stadium, and like you said, you're going to have Genther and Cooley who are going to be probably in the middle of their, productive primes and all that kind of stuff, and he can kind of come in there and kind of basically just be John Tavares, in a lot of sense. And that's cool, man. That's really cool. It's going to be even cooler when he goes to play for his childhood franchise and they're also still in Toronto after the Coyotes get relocated.
Yeah, to
Toronto, which I still want to happen. I do not care. They need to put a second team in Toronto. It's stupid that there's only one team in Toronto. But no, it makes a lot of sense for everybody involved. I think it certainly makes Brad Treliving's job really easy, really interesting because he's basically, like you said, he's got a 4 year window to figure this out. He's got to get the Nylander situation figured out. He's got to get the Marner situation figured out. And he's already got, Riley. So, to whatever extent that there's a core, it's done, So I guess see what happens with Bertuzzi, see what happens with Domi and stuff like that. But
yeah,
it really kind of does come down to the Nylander thing, I think. If he screws that situation up, then I think it'll be very hard for them to recover. He either has to make a great trade or he's got to get him locked up. And I know that's a very obvious statement, but I don't think there's very much wiggle room for him to make an underwhelming trade. He's got to get meaningful pieces because he can't trade Nylander for complete futures. He's got to get guys who can contribute to this 4 year window.
He's got to get young, cost-controlled players, right? Like that's the thing I think you have to go for right now. Like the whole Matthews situation, as much as it's a big contract, it doesn't significantly impact the cap in a meaningful way for Toronto. Like it goes up less than $2 million from what he's making now. So it's not
he makes
a
11.5 now.
Yeah, it's not a major impact on cap space to have. I mean, obviously, an extra $1.75 million or whatever it is for a team that's already up against the cap, $13 million over the cap right now without anybody on the LTIR, that does make a difference. I know they have some guys, I believe, that will eventually go on the LTIR, like Jake Muzzin and Matt Murray. But even then, that doesn't free up all the cap space they need to be cap compliant. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, man, because they really can't do anything else. Like they've got a lot of the bigger contracts of either guys that they're not going to trade, like Morgan Riley's not going anywhere, or guys they are kind of locked into with modified no trade clauses like TJ Brody. And they really can't trade him, right? Like they've got Riley, Klingberg, McCabe, Liljegren, and Giordano on defense, and then after that it kind of drops off to Muzzin, who's injured, and Connor Timmins. So they kind of need TJ Brody, even though he's on a 1-year deal, to go into this season. And then a lot of the forwards they've either just locked up, just brought in, or can't move, right? So it does come down to Nylander as the most likely option to head out the door. The Marner situation, that almost kind of figures itself out in a sense, because I don't imagine John Tavares comes back after his contract expires, and it expires at the same time as Mitch Marner. So you can kind of just allocate some of that cap space that you save there into a Mitch Marner deal. But the Nylander situation has to be solved quickly. And, you do see Bertuzzi and you do see Domi and a few others come off the books for next year. So there will be cap space to make it work and sign him to an extension where it's not like he's a UFA right now or an RFA or anything like that right now, where you have to sign him and you have no cap space. But you have to do that projection and say, okay, how much are we going to give this guy? Are we going to give him $8-9 million? And then how much cap space does that leave us for the next couple of years? And then when Marner re-ups for a couple million more than he makes now, how much are we up against the cap then? So it's a really interesting job Brad Treliving has to do, and it's kind of every decision he also has to also look a couple years into the future at how much cap space he's going to have then and what moves he can make then. So I don't know, man. I ultimately think Nylander probably stays in Toronto. I don't think they're going to get what they would want for him to make it worthwhile moving him out, but it all depends what that number ends up being. There's absolutely no way they can give him more than $10 million. They can't. They just can't have Matthews on 13, Tavares still on 11, Marner on almost 11, and Nylander at 10. Like they just can't have that.
Yeah, that's half the cap to 4 guys.
Yeah, even for one season, they still can't have that. Like it's a throwaway season at that point. You won't have enough of depth to really put anything together.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately the other part of this is, like you mentioned, like Bertuzzi, Domi, Klingberg, like these are guys who are only on 1-year deals. Mm-hmm. But like if those guys don't come back, I think that's a bad sign, right? Like I would expect Domi to move on or take a lesser contract or something, right? Because like I'm not a Domi fan. I don't think he's worth the money that they're paying him. I think they could use that money on a player who's going to be more effective in the same role. And I think he gets a lot of credit for being kind of a tough guy, and he's not. Like,
it's the name almost carries.
Yeah. Well, and look, like he had that great KO of Kessler when he was in Arizona, like where he just one-punched him with that uppercut. Like, he mixes it up and stuff, but he's not even like a Brad Marchand or anything like that. He's more just kind of yappy.
Know what he is. Like he isn't the skilled player like when he got drafted. He is, but like he's not a pure skill guy. He's not a pest. He's not a power forward. He's not a fighter. Like he's just
like a good third line.
He's kind of average at everything, but not great at anything.
Yeah,
which is fine. Right. But for he's making 5 right now or something like that.
I think like 3.5, something like that. I think Bertuzzi's making 5.
Yeah,
but Bertuzzi you hope comes back, and maybe Klingberg you hope comes back. And I think that's the thing for me with them is just kind of like, all right, like, yes, you do have the benefit of Tavares probably being done once his contract is up, and that gives you $11 million that you can do stuff with, or 10.5 or whatever it is. 11, right?
Yeah, so it's over 11.
That gives you money to work with, but how much of that are you going to end up giving to Nylander if he stays? How much of that are you going to give extra to
Marner?
Then you've got some of your younger guys, that are going to be on ELCs, but how long are they going to be on ELCs, right? Like, Are you going to get a full year out of Hirvonen or Niemela or Nyes? Like, or are they going to, maybe be guys who come up at the end of the season and you don't get a full thing out of them? And if it's worth it, if you get a good playoff run out of it, it's worth it, right? But it's just, there are a lot of questions there. You're going to have to start paying guys soon. And, Liljegren's contract's going to be up in a couple of years. Samsonov's going to need a new deal. Like, there's just all these weird pieces. And, like, this is what everybody, in the league has to do as part of being an NHL GM. It's just because they have such meaningful impact pieces right now, I mean, I guess if you're them, the benefit that you have right now is that you don't have a Darnell Nurse contract.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know how much of a better spot you are from a full roster construction. Like, I think they could use a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. They could certainly use a guy like Matthias Ekholm, something like that. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see how Toronto kind of tries to figure this one out.
Like the problem too is you want to keep Bertuzzi. If Domi has a good year, you'd want to keep him, right? If all these guys they have on these expiring deals have good years, you want to keep them. But the problem is if they have a good year, they're likely going to want either the same or more money than they have for a longer term, and the Leafs are going to then have to assess long term. Can they do that? Is that going to affect Marner? Is that going to, how is, Nylander work into that situation as well? Because he's the primary candidate of all of them to re-sign for next year as an expiring contract. So I don't envy the job Brad Treliving kind of walked into here because none of this is his mess, but he has to clean it up now and figure it out and work through it. And he's already got, because he was the orchestrator of the Matthew Tkachuk trade, right, and in Calgary. So he's already got that over his head, and obviously didn't pan out so far for Calgary with how Jonathan Huberdeau the season went for him with the Flames. Again, not totally his fault per se. Sutter is there and sucks the life out of everything offensively,
right.
but that he's got that hanging over him. So now any big trade is okay. Walks into the Nylander trade, he cannot mess that up because he's already, by public opinion, messed up the Matthew Tkachuk trade. So it's a very tough situation for anybody to walk into. But Brad Treliving already had to make one of those deals.
Right.
He's avoided that with Matthews. He's going to have to get into that with Marner. And that situation, I think, could be the trickiest of the three. Is that what is Marner getting for how long? And is Marner going to look at this situation and say, well, Matthews is probably gone and by the time Marner's re-upping in 2 years. And Nylander at that time, who knows if he's either gone or extended. Does Marner want to stay 6-7 years when the future of the team beyond Matthews is nobody knows what's going to happen, right? So,
well, here's the other thing for me, right, is who is their next second line center? Like, they don't have one. And I just, that to me, like, that is the reason you keep Willie Nylander if you can, is between him and Marner, you have two legitimate top-line wings who you can put one of them with Matthews and the other one on a second line to be the offensive play driver there.
Yeah.
But, boy, man, that's like – so my little take is related to the Nylander stuff. So we should let's just jump into it in a second. But real quick, what were your thoughts on the Erik Karlsson trade?
I think it's okay.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, it was never going to be easy for San Jose to get anything significant because of how much money he was making. There's not many teams that could make it work. I think it's great for the Penguins to make it. I think they need to do whatever they can to try and win again with Crosby. And from everything that it looked like, they were on their way out of contenders. There's a lot of other teams, kind of, young up-and-coming teams that have pipped them out of that spot. And whatever the Penguins can do right now, they don't have anything in the cupboard to kind of, I don't want to say cheaply acquire a player like Erik Karlsson, but to bring in impact players like that, to take another run at it with Malkin, with Crosby, with Letang. They have to do it, and I'm fine with those moves for them because there's no point in them pushing into a rebuild until Crosby's hung up the skates and retired as a Penguin, right? Like, you just have to keep pushing.
For sure.
And especially because it's not like he's declined at all. He's still playing as a top 10 player in this league, and Malkin is still seemingly, playing again whenever he's healthy, as the same as he has for the last 10 years. So I'm fine with it. I think all teams involved. There was Montreal who ended up eating some cap space, I think, on that deal. So
Took DeSmith, Petrie.
Yeah, and they ended up flipping Petrie too. So Montreal did well for utilizing their cap space there, but it's really between the Penguins and the Sharks. And I think on both sides, I can see, obviously the Sharks had to get him out. That situation had come to a point they had to trade him. I can't imagine there was significantly more suitors beyond the Penguins, maybe one or two, and that could actually take even half of Erik Karlsson's contract or whatever they ended up taking on. Fit-wise, maybe it's not the best fit for what the Penguins could use, but they had to do something, right? They had to do something impactful.
I think that's my issue with it in a sense, is it's just like I don't know how much they're going to get out of it relative to it, right? Because it's does Chris Letang play second line now, like second pair? And who's on the power play? Because you've got Malkin, you've got
injuries
Gensel.
Concerns with Letang.
Yes, but
right?
I think you can also say that that would be a concern with Karlsson, who's getting older, who's had ankle issues in the past. Like there is a non-zero chance that they hit the playoffs and neither of those guys are healthy. There's a non-zero chance they miss the playoffs because they both miss time. I don't think anything you're saying, I agree with you. You have to do something. You can't rebuild as long as you have Crosby and Malkin and Letang. But I'm not going to lie, man. It makes a lot more sense to me for Dubas to have tried to get him to Toronto, because he would be perfect for Toronto.
Yeah.
He plays on that right side. He'd be, all that different stuff. So, it's interesting. I don't think San Jose did as bad as people are saying. They got a first-round pick. It's going to be what it is. They're probably going to get a second or a third for Granlund when they move him and retain and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think they did fine, and they didn't retain any salary on his deal. So, or no, did they retain maybe 1.5 or something?
I think they
retained something minimal.
Yeah.
But they did minimal retention. And, I think it's going to be good for them in the long run. So I think it was a perfectly fine trade. I just think, I don't feel like anybody came out of that trade head and shoulders better than they went into that trade in terms of what they're trying to do, right? San Jose didn't get any premium assets other than the cap space. Pittsburgh added a good player, but I don't know how much they needed that particular type of player.
Yeah.
And then, Montreal gets a couple of little things here and there, which is fine, cool. But, I guess that's the thing for me.
It's cliche or a cop-out to kind of say this is we'll have to wait and see how it pans out for Pittsburgh to really assess it. But it is this is the one where it kind of fits that description of the wait and see description more than anything.
But to me, they're the only team that it's a wait and see for, right?
Yeah.
Because if you want to, you could be well, it's going to depend on what San Jose does with that first round pick. Well, yeah, sure. But that's how it always
trade,
works.
Yeah.
So, I think Pittsburgh is the one where you're all right, man, you just locked up 4 years, $10 million to a 32, 33-year-old, offensive guy. It's going to be interesting. We'll see. But
yeah, because Carolina, you could understand, yes, they have Brent Burns, but you could understand, a fit for Karlsson there on number one power play. Like you said, Toronto would have been kind of the perfect fit to take over that number one power play spot from Morgan Riley and take some of the responsibilities off of him. But I just don't think they could make it work when we just talked about the fact that they had to sign Matthews and have to sign Nylander and eventually Marner and still have Tavares. You can't bring in another $11 million player into that fold and try and make that work, even with a lot of that salary getting retained. And they didn't have a Petrie that they could easily give up. Like Pittsburgh did, to kind of help offset some of that cost. So ultimately, again, I think the only place he could have gone is the place he ended up going in Pittsburgh. It's just that question of fit with Chris Letang already there. So it's some injury cover for Chris Letang if he does get hurt again or has some of the issues. I think he had blood clot issues. I think he was facing at a time here. So a few times last season. I think that's what it was. He was dealing with some sort of weird injury troubles last year. But even if he is healthy, I mean, again, still, it's not a bad problem to have that you have a 1-2 punch. You can throw them both on and stack a power play with Karlsson Letang. You can have Karlsson on power play 1 and Letang on power play 2, or vice versa. So I think ultimately, it is what it is for both teams. I don't give one team a higher grade than the other because the Sharks had to move him, and the Penguins are probably the only fit that they could make work.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So, okay.
Do we have to round off the Nylander stuff with, like, linking it to Anaheim? Because I know, was it Mike Rupp had mentioned he thought the Ducks would be a good fit for that?
So, they were on NHL Network doing just a general kind of around the league kind of thing. It seemed like they were talking about the Nylander situation. Mike Rupp said he thinks – I want to make sure I say this right because I don't want to say he said something he didn't. Basically, they said, I believe he said, it seems like Nylander might get traded, and he thinks Nylander could do very well going somewhere to be the guy. And then he said, he didn't source it, he didn't say anything other than, I just think he would be a great fit in Anaheim with what they're trying to build.
Yeah, just his opinion.
Yeah, just his opinion. Just him, just talking off the top of his head kind of a thing. And that is kind of how we ended up with, like, the Hockey News writing an article about it, the hockey writers writing an article about it, Bleacher Report, I think, did something. But, like, it just kind of became a thing because it's the middle of August or the end of August. There's nothing going on. And it's Toronto and, Zegras, right?
Yep.
So, all that kind of stuff. You've got a rebuilding team that teams could see making big moves, things like that. All of that leads me to this. Given what we said about them needing a second-line center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we're going to the same place here.
Does it not make sense to trade Mason McTavish to Toronto?
Oh, okay, we aren't going to the same place. Yeah,
because here's my question. So you have in our notes talking about Pat Verbeek thinks ultimately Trevor Zegras is the one of the 3 centers that they have now who could move to the wing.
Mm-hmm. Karlsson, Zegras, and McTavish.
Right. And again, a lot of that is because they see Leo Carlsson as a dominant 2-way first-line center in the not, again, try to be careful, especially because he's on the team now. So, like, we don't want to, poison pill ourselves. But in that Kopitar Bergeron type impact mold, Barkov kind of a thing, right? Where he's able to put up points. He's an impact player in offense, but he's also going to be able to hard match in the playoffs and, hopefully be a guy who's looking at, like, Selke trophies and stuff like that. If you have that, and then you have Zegras, who's an offensive, dynamic creator. Is it the worst thing in the world to move on from Mason McTavish, knowing you have Nathan Gaucher, who looks like he can be a middle 6, hard-nosed defensive forward, and, like, you have the cap space.
Mm-hmm.
I think trading Mason McTavish while he's on his ELC, he fits, again, like we said, they don't have another center. He could play, wing for them for another year or 2, or Tavares could move to the wing, whatever. Like, there's ways around it that could make it happen. And he fills a very clear hole for that team. On top of that, and this is the thing about this that when I saw it ultimately changed my mind. Willie Nylander is 27 right now, but he turned 27 in May. So Anaheim, if they traded for him right now, would get all of his 27, 28, and 29 seasons. Leo Carlsson probably comes in the next year or 2, right? So am I completely insane for thinking getting 3 to 4 years at the end of Willie Nylander's prime to match with this Troy Terry, this Trevor Zegras, and hopefully what we think Leo Carlsson can be? All of that added to this young defense getting better. Like, am I completely insane?
I think partially. And I think it makes sense what you're saying. I think the piece they would want in Toronto is probably Mason McTavish, one of him or Drysdale. But I think, again, when they're looking long term, you think, okay, what do we do after John Tavares goes? And we still want a player who can kind of maybe step into that 2C role and replace him. And we can use that cap space elsewhere to fill out the rest of the wings. I think that makes sense. I just, from an Anaheim standpoint, like, I find it very tough to move on from Mason McTavish after an impressive rookie season, and when you expect a 1-2 punch down the middle of Carlson and McTavish and the flexibility to move Zegras to the wing and have Zegras and Terry as wingers, to make that move and pull the trigger on McTavish. I see them more likely, because of how stocked the prospect pools on defense right now, to almost have that be Jamie Drysdale instead.
Mm-hmm. I think that is right. I just think, in the sense of a negotiation and in the sense of projecting, I think McTavish has a lot of value specifically to Toronto, like we talked about, especially off of his World Juniors play, right?
For sure.
You get to just run that fucking clip over and over and be like, this is the kid we're bringing in to help out with, beautiful Canadian boy Mitch Marner and Morgan Riley, and then also that damn American Aston Matthews, like all that stuff. Like, it's all right there. And then on top of that, I think for Anaheim, it makes it a little easier to not have to add a ton more assets. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you're still going to have to beef it up, right? I'm not suggesting it's a 1-for-1 dumb thing like that or anything like that. But, like, I think it becomes easier to finagle in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think the prospect of being able to keep Trevor Zegras at center lessens the impact to me.
Yeah.
Because here's my question. In 4 years, who do you think is better, McTavish or Zegras?
I still stand by Trevor Zegras being the better player in 4 years.
I think so too. And if that's the case, my question is then, who is better, McTavish or Nylander? Now, the argument is the next 4 or 5 years of Willie Nylander versus the next 9 years of Mason McTavish, and that is a very good point. And that in and of itself, I think, is reason to say it's a dumb idea. Mm-hmm. I just think it's really interesting. And when I saw that he was such a late birthday, it really late birthday by NHL season standards, right?
Yeah.
It really made me curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
the only other thing I could see, obviously, I think McTavish would probably be the beginning ask, and if the Ducks absolutely say no to that, some sort of Henrique 50% retained with Drysdale, and something around that going the other way. So the Leafs don't completely lessen the impact that they would get from Nylander this year. They bring in Henrique, who can play the top 6 role for them. He's not going to be a Nylander, but he's going to contribute, probably 50 points in that team, and he can play center if they need him to, and even move down in the lineup and play third-line center if they absolutely need him to do that. And then you bring in a young, cost-controlled player in Jamie Drysdale to your defense core. And then there'd be other things included, of course, but that's the one I'd still be almost uncomfortable with that in a sense. But I love bringing in Willie Nylander. It's just, Jamie Drysdale, there's that what if because of the whole season missed of injury, right? Is we were all expecting a step forward after the rookie season. In his sophomore season last year, we didn't see anything because of the injury. So you get that what if factor, but you're bringing in William Nylander at the same time, right? And adding that to Zegras, McTavish, Terry, Leo Carlson, right? So you know your forward group gets significantly better, but it's lessened impact on the defense core by the fact you have Zellweger, you have Mintyukov, you have Tristan Luneau, you have Noah Warren, and all those guys, Hellison, Lacombe still there. That you lose maybe right now. I guess I would still call Jamie Drysdale the crown jewel of that defense core, prospect core. His grip is very close to loosening
Very
on maybe
tenuous,
that
yeah,
title
for
with
sure.
the seasons that three of the Ducks prospects had last year. It does hurt losing that, but again, you're bringing in William Nylander, so that's the one I would still be hard pressed to be happy with it immediately, but it'd be the only one I think I'd be comfortable with. I don't think losing Mason McTavish in that trade, it would take me a while to be comfortable with that, and a lot of it would just depend on how does Mason McTavish pan out? Because we know what you're getting in William Nylander. It's just what does Mason McTavish become, and how does that impact the Ducks' future? And how much do you get out of Nylander success-wise as a team, right? Like
Right.
that's the concerning thing with
Well, and what is that
trade.
cap hit next, right? Because it
Yeah.
has to come with an extension, which
Has
means
to.
now he's got the leverage. So does that mean he becomes a $10 million player?
Yeah, and how do you fit that in with Zegras having an
Right.
extension as well? And so yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. I ultimately think the Leafs go into the season with him unsigned or
Yeah,
for
I
next
think
year.
they have to.
And it becomes a conversation that they explore a little bit closer to the deadline if it's not fixed at that point, and it's not the best timing to want to have to do that, but
I don't think you can roll into the new year without resolution there. Like, you either have to accept you're going to lose him, or you could lose him, or you have to trade him and give your team time to work in whatever else you're bringing in, right? Like, I don't think you can make that with 25 games left. You have
No.
to have 35, 40 games of runway for that to work, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to hope that he doesn't start slow, and that value
Yeah.
publicly decreases, right? So it's a tricky situation that they're going to be in. I don't see a contract being signed before the start of the season. I don't know. I don't even know. Again, they can't even make the cap space work now, let alone next year with him signing an extension. So it's a very tricky situation for them to get in. Obviously, the player is going to want a certain amount and feel like he deserves close to what Marner makes now, which is over $10 million, or just in that $10 million range. And the team is going to want to get absolutely nowhere close to that to be able to make other moves and fill out the rest of the roster for the next 4 years of Austin Matthews. So the Leafs they're always interesting to watch, but it's definitely going to be interesting to watch what Brad Treliving can do with this team in the situation that he's kind of been handed. And he hasn't put himself in the situation. He's been handed this situation.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, he knew what situation he was walking into.
Yeah.
You know, when he interviewed and took the job and all
100%.
that stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, 100%. I'm with you. Boy, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. I sat here for a little bit today just thinking about it, being like, I could really be talked into this trade working out because of the way the prospect pool could kind of be finagled. And again, like, this is a dude who's put up 30 goals multiple times. He scored 40 goals last year. And like we keep talking about it, goals are what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And if your top two wings are Terry and Nylander, I think you just feel a lot better about the goal scoring upside that this team has.
100%. They could definitely use a winger like William Nylander. I know every team can, but the Ducks right now are desperate for an impact winger to add to Troy Terry, essentially only right now.
Yeah.
I know you bring in Alex Killorn and whatever, but still, to bring in a younger player in a sense in William Nylander that the impact he can bring, it adds a lot to this team. It just does depend on what you're giving up and how that affects the future of this team and where you think they're going to be in the next couple of years, that they can take full advantage of William Nylander in his prime, right? So
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure.
All right, you want to get into the Troy Terry contract as well?
Yeah, man.
Okay,
Let's
before I get into that, I just want to give an update on one thing. Will Francis, Ducks prospect, plays for the University of Minnesota Duluth. We've had him on the podcast before, but some unfortunate news from his side. He had just battled through cancer and beat it, presumably is what everybody had thought, and he had come back and played last year, and he was going to make his way to development camp. Unfortunately, they announced that his cancer is back and he's going to miss the entire season, or it looks like the entire season, for University of Minnesota Duluth. So I just wanted to give a shout out to him and his family and hope he's doing okay and wish him the best of luck, because that's tough news, man. Like I know the good news I think came near the beginning of last season that he'd gotten through it and he had fought through it and he was ready to go. So it just kind of sucked to hear that. So just wishing him the best, wishing his family the best, and hopefully he's back on the ice sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's incredibly tough news. It's a lot to have to go through and have to do so at such a young age, and stuff like that is overwhelming. But it seems, to whatever extent, that he's got a really good support system and he's going to be able to have people around him to help him get through it, because that's not easy. I believe it was leukemia that he has, which is absolutely brutal. So, just like you said, sending him and his family and his loved ones all the best, and just, we really hope that he's able to get through this and just get back to, living his life however that is, right? I don't even think anybody cares about the hockey part of it. Obviously, that's something he loves, and if he can keep doing that, that's obviously great. But more than anything, it's just him being able to live a happy and healthy, long life. So,
Yeah, no, just wanted to give that shout out. He's a great kid. We had him on the show back when he got drafted, but to fight back and have to be here with that news, it's tough to hear. So again, wishing him the best. Just wanted to get that out there before we moved on here. But Troy Terry, of course, in typical podcast fashion, a couple days after we finished our last episode, he signed his new contract, extended a 7x7. Neither of us were direct hits with our guesses.
I was a complete myth.
You were, what were you on? 6.25 or something?
I think I had him at 6.5. I think I had him at the Cam Fowler contract, 8x6.5.
I had the money, but not the term, right? Or was it the term, not the money?
No, you had the term, the money.
I'm gonna go pull it up right now because I gotta. I know we tweeted out our guesses. I think close after we finished the last episode, so I'm gonna pull it up just to see how far off both of us were.
Oh, wait a minute! I think I have a note in my phone, which would make this a lot easier.
I got it.
Okay.
So I guess 7x6.75, and you had 6x6.5. So I had the term and just off on the money. And you weren't far off either. We both thought it'd be under 7, but ultimately 7x7 seems fair, right? For what he's done and what he's gotten is a little bit higher, I think, than what we both were expected and maybe in some sense we're comfortable with. But it's not significantly higher. It's just a couple $100,000 higher than we thought it would be. It's worrisome. I don't want to say it in a bad way because I do think he's a great player. But it's off the back of 2 decent seasons for Troy Terry where he's looked exceptional because the rest of the team has been bad. And he has been very good. I hate saying that because I know it's going to get taken as well, he's only been good because the rest of the team's been bad. That's not the case. But when you compare his numbers to a lot of other players who are getting these types of deals, there is some concern there. Can he continue to do this moving forward? Right. Is he going to be a 30-goal guy or is he only a 20-goal guy? Because we've seen 2 good seasons from players with the Ducks in the past, and then the rest of it hasn't been there. And not many of them have been given a 7x7 deal, right?
Right.
All things considered, the underlying numbers show that Troy Terry is going to be fine. He's going to be able to keep doing this. When you watch him play, he just looks like a completely different player than he was, 3 or 4 years ago. He's made significant strides. He just looks like a player who can continue to do this on a yearly basis. So you're not concerned in that sense. But yeah, it is a smallish sample size to be like, yep, here's a 7x7 deal. You're locked in, right? So that is the one concerning thing. But I am happy to see him sign, and I am happy that they were able to resolve it, and then he's part of the Ducks' future for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of took some of the heat already for it, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think if you aren't a Ducks fan, this is this deal looks like an overpay.
Oh yeah, my friend is a Leafs fan. Immediately
Well, he maybe
messaged me
shouldn't
after
talk
this. Yeah,
about
he shouldn't talk,
overpays,
but
considering they just gave Morgan Riley like $9 million.
he messaged me right after this. He said, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" And I was like, "Man,
Oh
like
yeah, and like
it's
I
not
I
that bad."
think again from a purely objective, I do think he's closer to 6 to 6.5 in that range.
Mhm.
I think, um, especially with 7 years, you would like to see it down closer to 6. Again, he went from a 37 goal season to like a 23 goal season. His 37 goal season, he shot like 19% that year. Like, there are warning signs
Yeah.
that the production could be an issue going forward. Now, where you see the positives and the potential: new coach, new system, hopefully a stronger roster around him, which, yes, he is feasting on opportunities that were afforded to him by the rest of the roster being dog shit. But this contract cements his status at the top of the roster, and he is going to now get those same opportunities as he's earned, right?
Mhm.
I have no problem with where he is in the pecking order or anything like that. And this contract cements where this team expects him to be moving forward as far as his production, his role, his impact, things like that. So he's still going to get those opportunities. You're going to see the relative talent around him improve, which should help him continue to be productive and hopefully get back closer to that 30 to 35 goal and maybe 70, 75, 80 points range. I think if you're a Ducks fan, what you kind of need to admit here is that $1 million to $500,000 of this contract is entirely intangible money.
Mhm.
They are paying him to be a leader, to be a presence, to be a meaningful member in that locker room and on the ice from a non-production standpoint. And by everything we've seen and heard, he has all of the makings of being able to do that.
Yeah.
But I only think that this contract makes sense when you look at him making a little extra money every year to be a major part of the culture of this team moving forward.
Yeah. And I think when you take that into account, it makes it easier to stomach in a sense. Is that you're
Yeah, and
not
I
gonna.
have no problem with that. Like
Mhm.
I think it's important to do things like that, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here after 3 seasons or whatever, however long I've been around on this stupid podcast, you know, fucking talking about how important culture and intangibles and all that stuff is. I'm not going to go against that. Like, I think that stuff really, really matters. I think that was one of the things, again, that we saw last year was how big the fall off post Getzlaf was from a culture standpoint, you know. So I'm not going to sit here and act like he's not worth it because based on the interview he did or the article that Eric Stevens put out on The Athletic after the contract, this is some of the stuff he talked about and what the expectations and stuff like that are. Like, there's every reason to think that he has earned that money on and off the ice. But there are red flags about the production or warnings. I don't want to say red flags, but like there are concerns. And if he becomes a 25, 60 point guy, he's going to have to intangible his fucking ass off to be a $7 million player.
Yeah. Listen, for me, if he doesn't regress, it's fine, right? And if you're in a middle ground, as long as everything stays the same, then you're fine. So I like it in that sense, and you're not paying him for what he could be. You're not, you're not getting into that realm where we've discussed with some contracts before. You are paying him for what he is now and what he has been for 2 seasons. The argument is that enough time to say this is what he is going to be for the foreseeable future, right? It's the argument we got into, and Raquel didn't sign a contract, but to great seasons of Rickard Rakell being a 30-goal scorer, and then we didn't see it again. And I'm not saying Troy Terry's in that same realm of inconsistency and whatever, but it is an argument you have. Is like, is 2 seasons enough to say this is what you are, and we're going to pay you for this? That's the only concern I get out of this, and I have a lot more confidence in Troy Terry continuing to be this player just from watching him play and looking at the underlying numbers, that he can drive play in his own, and that regardless of the supporting cast around him, like you said, it's going to get better. So it's not like it's going to get worse like it maybe did with Rickard Rakell.
Right.
That Troy Terry can only kind of go up from here. And as long as it doesn't regress, even if he stays a 60 to 65 point player, can kind of get around 30 goals every now and then, but continue to be a great two-way player and a leader in the locker room, that regardless, as long as he stays around that tier in production, it's worth it. It's valuable. He's going to be a contributing member of this team. If things get better, if he becomes a consistent 30-goal scorer, if he can get to 70 to 80 points a season, then it's a great deal. It's a great contract because he's outproducing what they're paying him at that point, right? And as long as the cap continues to go up, that contract looks better and better. So there is that potential that this becomes a really good deal. But at this point, you look at it and say, you know what, it's fair. I have some concerns. A lot of it has to do with, is he going to continue to do this? And you get that with a lot of deals, so I think it's fine. I'm not ready to say it's a steal, and I'm not ready to say it's a disappointment. I'm right on the fence right now, and another this year and next year from Troy Terry to see what he can do, and that will help me pick a side basically on how I feel about this contract.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, I think, this is something they kind of talk about on Puck Soup and stuff, and I think it makes a lot of sense, which is when you're looking at a contract, what are the likelihood that they underperform and what are the likelihood that they outperform? Mm-hmm. And I think you're right that the floor on Troy Terry as a player is high enough to not be concerned. I think the question is what are the odds he's more than a $7 million player at any point during this contract? And that's where I'm a little unsure. Mm-hmm. More than anything, though, I had a whole stupid Twitter rant about this, about how much I hate the pocket watching of contracts because of the hard cap. I'm so happy for Troy Terry. He's worked incredibly hard. Seems like an absolutely great kid. There is everything about this for him that I love. I am so happy for him and for his family, and I'm ecstatic that he's going to be a Duck, hopefully for a really long time. It's a hard cap league, so that makes us kind of have to be cynical at points, and that's where some of the questions are. But of all the players to take a risk on, I think this is the guy that you do it with. Yep. This isn't a Matt Bolesky. This isn't a Rickard Rakell. There is every reason to think he can continue to be a meaningful player on this team for the foreseeable future and be a major part of why this team is competitive and can return to a level of Stanley Cup contention that I guess fans of a certain age are accustomed to.
Yep.
And he will be a big part of that. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more ways in this situation with him as a player to see how things you're more confident that things can go up, right? Like you're more confident that he's not going to regress, and I think you're also more confident that he can get even better when the team gets better around him. If he continues to play with Mason McTavish as McTavish evolves as a player, and the Ducks get more goal scorers on the wing to play with Troy Terry and McTavish or Troy Terry and Trevor Zegras, that the potential for him to become a 70 to 80 point player is there, and you're a bit more confident with that. So I'm completely fine with that. I, like you said, and all the intangible side of things, and him as a person, I'm ecstatic to see him signed until he's 32. I hope he stays here until at least this contract is up, and depending on how things go beyond that, because I think he has potential to be the next captain of this team and be an impactful player through this next period of success for the Ducks. And he's exactly the type of player you want to kind of start building as part of your core.
Absolutely.
There's no concerns there, so I'm happy with it. In regards to the other contracts, more so Trevor Zegras, when do we start worrying? We had this question back, and I think it was like July 10th. Somebody messaged us and say, "Oh, I'm starting to worry now. Like, what's going on?" And I said, "Okay, you know what? If you get back to me near the end of August, and if he's not signed, then maybe I'll start to worry at that point." Should we start to worry about Trevor Zegras? Because we haven't heard much. Few supposed reports here and there that, okay, it's more likely now that he'll sign a 2-year deal or something like that, or a bridge deal versus a longer-term deal, but nothing concrete. I don't even remember what the source was for that. I just remember seeing it in kind of an aggregator type account. Are you worried? Do you think he's more than likely to sign a shorter-term deal now than a longer-term deal? What are your thoughts?
I guess I would say that the longer this goes on, the more likely it would seem to me that a short-term deal is what ends up happening. Because if a long-term deal was more likely, it seems to me that that's easier to do. Like, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that makes sense. But if the player and the team are looking at each other and they're like, 8 years, 8 years. Okay. Now we just worry about the number. We move the numbers around a little bit. Sorry. To me, this is more of I want X amount over X amount, over X term, which piercing analysis right there. And I just think I wonder how. I guess the question for me is who is unsatisfied with the conversation?
Right.
Is Pat Verbeek trying to play this super tight and super close to the vest, or is Trevor Zegras asking for the moon? Is he asking for a super short deal? Like, again, he's really good friends with the Tkachuks and the Hughes. Those are two very different, kind of examples. Matthew Tkachuk did 3x7 and then ended up in Florida, and Hughes did 8x8. Both of those, I think, make sense if you're Trevor Zegras, right? You look at 8x8.5, 8x9, maybe something like that, or 3x6, 3x6.5, something like that, and you go, I'm going to bet on myself, or I want you to make a significant commitment to me. Yeah. And I think both of those make sense. And, I'm not a huge, especially with the Evan Bouchard deal being announced today, 2 by $3.9 million. There are a lot of people who, over the last couple of years, or over the last couple of weeks, I should say, have been very much pointing out the peril and risk of the bridge deal. I only think I'm not convinced that bridge deals are bad. I think we've talked about this last time. I think they have a place, and I think they make a lot of sense. And when you're a team like Anaheim that does have so much cap space moving forward, I don't think you need to be afraid of it. I think you need to be afraid of it when it's like what happened with Darnell Nurse, where all of a sudden he has this one great season and he's got you up against the wall, and now you're paying Darnell Nurse to be Erik Karlsson, and he's just fucking not.
Yeah.
I think there are I guess the original question of at what point you should be concerned is I think now is where you kind of get to the point where you're like, well, this feels a little weird. We haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe if the Jamie Drysdale contract gets signed by the end of the week, I feel better just because it's okay, we're just nailing things out, right? Mm-hmm. They went and he made the Lyubushkin trade. He got the Stalock signing. He did this, he did that. He's making moves or whatever. He's focusing on all these other things, and he's just not got that armor down. Maybe I feel better. I might be getting nervous in so much as just which side of this is the part that's having hesitation. Because there's no way for us to know, and I don't want to assume it's either side, right? I don't think that's fair, right? I don't want to be on the, Trevor Zegras is preparing to leave for New York. or Pat Verbeek doesn't think Trevor Zegras is actually a legitimate number one center, or all that. Like, I don't want to get into that because that's entire speculation that I don't really think. One, I don't think it's useful, and two, there's really nothing to go off of on any of that. So,
yeah, I started to worry more after the Troy Terry deal got signed, and we still haven't heard anything. And I know it's only been a couple weeks since then. I always felt the Troy Terry situation was going to kind of take precedence with him being arbitration eligible, that was going to be like a timeline type thing, and that was going to have to take precedence because they were going to have a certain time they had to get it dealt with and finished by. Now it's done, and a few other things have happened, like you'd mentioned, the Lyubushkin trade. They announced Scott Harrington was signed to a PTO, and Verbeek made comments not about the contracts but about other things and referenced Zegras and his potential to move to the wing, but nothing still on contracts at all. Nothing leaked, which I guess is a good thing. Things are being kept tight to the chest in Anaheim, but it does leave you wondering, right? And that's where you start to get concerned. And it's not so much concerned, like you said, about Trevor Zegras leaving Anaheim or not signing here or whatever. It's more a concern of we've heard nothing. We have absolutely no idea what's going on. And that's where I think the concern stems from is, like you said, who's not giving on either side? What does the player want? What does the team want? Does Zegras want a long-term deal and the team wants a short-term deal? Or they both want the same thing in term or not agreeing on money? And like, where are they at? And the fact that we don't know anything is I think, more so where I draw concern from, rather than, oh, well, Trevor Zegras isn't going to be an Anaheim Duck next season. Well, no, I'm not concerned about that. I think he's going to either sign a bridge deal or he's going to sign a long-term deal. Those are the only two outcomes from this. I don't think it's going to draw into the regular season either. I think it's going to get resolved before the start of the season. Again, my concern just draws from the uncertainty of not knowing anything about the situation and not knowing what's going on. I do have my own concerns with the bridge deal. I don't think they necessarily mean the player doesn't want to be there or that they're looking for a way out. There's more stability. There's more, comfortability with a long-term deal, knowing they're going to be here for 7 years or 8 years before you even have to discuss another contract again. A 3x6 means in 2 years we're talking about this again. Yep. And we're talking about an extension again, and we're going through this whole situation again. And it's likely a bit more difficult because he's either gotten a lot better or he's stayed around the same level, and we don't know. We have more to evaluate on what this guy is worth at that point in time. So, that's the more concerning thing on the bridge side of things, is that we have to do this again in 2 years if he signs a 3-year contract, and we have to have this whole discussion over again and what he's worth, and is he going to sign, and how long is he going to take, and he's going to be an RFA, so it's going to take some time because they're going to have time to deal with it. So that's where I draw more concern from there more than anything, is just that we have to do this sooner if it's a bridge deal rather than later.
Yeah, and then, you run into the issue of like, okay, well, what happens if they're right about Leo Carlson? Mm-hmm. If he's coming off his ELC or getting ready to come off his ELC at the same time we're having to renegotiate a new contract for Zegras, like, in the perfect world, that's bad because Zegras is a 90-point guy and Leo Carlson looks like he's a legitimate number one. I think in a perfect world, Leo Carlson looks like the second coming of Patrice Bergeron and Trevor Zegras is Nikita Kucherov. And you're just like, great. But you're also like, well, this is kind of fucked because now we got to figure out how to pay all these guys.
McTavish too, right? So.
Right. Well, he's going to be gone for Nylander, but
okay, Nylander then, and Minchikov and Zellweger and Luneau and Drysdale and all these guys, right?
And that's, I guess that's where you say there's concern with the bridge deal, like you said. I have no problem paying these guys what they're worth and all that kind of stuff. I always want the players to get paid. It is just about the team building dynamic of it and what parts of this start to get more complicated over the next couple of years. Because again, as we're going to talk about, Anaheim's got a couple of really exciting prospects, two of which are guys who look like they could put up points from the blue line. Those guys cost money. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of moving pieces, and this is certainly something that I would think a lot of people involved would like to have sorted sooner than later. But everything with Verbeek, man, he plays it real cool, and I don't know what to do with that yet, right? We just don't have a big enough sample size of him handling these situations to have an idea of where his head could be at. At least with Bob Murray, you were like, oh, he's probably just being an asshole about cap hit, right? Like he doesn't like paying young guys. He's perfectly fine overpaying veterans, but he doesn't like to pay young guys. So that's where the fight is, right? That's where it was with, Hampus Lindholm. That's where it was with Nick Ritchie, all that other stuff. So like, it's just, we just don't have anything to go on yet. And I think that's probably the biggest point of concern.
Yeah, so. No, I mean, it could be very close. We have no idea. It could get announced tomorrow, it could get announced next week or next month. We don't really know. And ultimately, like, my thought is the team prefers, and this is just based on, again, like you said, on kind of a team building thing, that the team prefers a longer term deal around like a $7 to $8 million for an 8-year deal, and the player in Zegras' camp would maybe prefer a shorter term deal, a 3-year deal or something like that for less money now, knowing and banking on himself that he can be a $10, 11, $12 million player in 3 years' time. Which, again, it's not a bad thing for Anaheim in a sense that if he becomes that player, that's great. And you know what? Pay him what he's worth. And he's a 90 to 100-point player at that point, so you're not complaining. You'll work around it. You'll figure it out. But that's where I imagine it's at. But, again, that's complete pure speculation on the only reason I can think of why this isn't done yet is that one camp wants one thing and another camp wants the other thing, and they're trying to find a solution that works best for both parties at this point. That's the only thing I can think of is why this has continued to take this long. But I'm completely open and understanding and willing to be wrong, 100% wrong about the situation. I think it's one that we don't have anything come out until it's the announcement that it's signed.
Yeah.
And we might not even find out anything beyond that. It just might be a deal gets announced and it's signed, and we have no idea who wanted what and who wanted this, and we just get the complete outcome of it. That's, again, a good thing in the sense that nothing is getting leaked, but that's just the way things have gone in Anaheim since Pat Verbeek has taken over. I don't expect to hear much until it's announced.
Yeah, no, I mean, and historically that's been the way it's been in Anaheim for years now, right? Bob Murray was notoriously tight-lipped about things. Pat Verbeek seems to be the same. It's a small market. So, you don't necessarily have the overwhelming press coverage and interest and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of different factors that lead to it, but it's just one of those things where it doesn't make it any more fun as a Duck fan as this process gets stretched on. So
100%. Okay, so speaking of Karlsson and his impact sooner rather than later, Isac Lundestrom out with Achilles surgery. He's going to be out at least 6 months. He's going to miss the majority of the upcoming season. That then opens up a potential roster spot for Nathan Gauthier or Leo Carlsson, specifically those two of the guys who are more likely to make the roster as a center and play. Does it have any effect on that? Do you think it opens up a spot for them to play center for this team next season, or are the odds exactly the same as they were if Lundestrom was healthy or not?
I don't think it necessarily affects the Karlsson situation. I could definitely see it having an effect on the Gauthier situation. I think the other name I would throw out there that has the opportunity to be affected by this is your boy Bo Gruel. I wonder to what extent, does I guess the question for me first and foremost is Ryan Strome ever going to play center in Anaheim again?
Yeah.
Because I don't really think he should. I've said, a few times, I think a third line of Strome, Vetrano, and McGinn is a thing that I could be talked into very easily. I think Strome as an offensive third line center makes a lot of sense. But I also understand if they want to play him on the wing and they want to try to get more out of his playmaking ability, especially given the lack of depth on that right wing side. So I think, you're looking at Gaucher and Gruel as the two who maybe can come up on this. I would like to think it doesn't affect Leo Carlsson. I think he's probably going to go back to Sweden the longer I sit with it and just spend another year there kind of doing some home cooking shit. I know me and you weren't necessarily the highest on that, but I just, I don't know. I don't really mind it. It wouldn't be my preferred option. I'd rather have him in San Diego where he can get brought up if he looks ready ahead of schedule. But if they want to give him just another year, try to get some more of this roster sorted out, maybe move on from some of the driftwood, right? Like get Silfverberg out, maybe move on from Henrique, get one more year of a top 5, top 7 pick, right? Like Celebrini and Yzerman would look real nice on this team. You know what I mean? Like it's not. I don't think there's any rush. I think all things considered, his situation should be the least affected. I think it makes sense to think or assume that he could be the guy who really steps in. But unless he has an incredible camp, I just think you send him home and you let it be what it is. Gaucher, again, like we talked about with McTavish, with his physicality and his size and his ability, I think he could very easily step in and really fill out that kind of third, fourth line center role and really try to stake his claim on being that hard checking Anaheim center for the next few years this year. So he would be the one I think I'd be the most excited about, but I could certainly see Bo Gruel kind of making it his position. He can play all 3 forward spots. So, he's versatile. He can penalty kill. He's got some good speed. He's a smart kid, like all that stuff. So I think there's a lot there, but I think Carlson is the one player of this I would expect to be the least affected. Because if he was going to make the roster, he was going to make the roster.
Yeah, no, I'm in that standpoint. I don't think this affects him anyway. I don't think it affects the decision the Ducks were going to make either way. I do think he gets his 9 games or whatever, no matter what. He was going to get that regardless. I do think it is at center. I think we see Zegras McTavish as 1-2 and Carlson as like a third-line center, potentially playing with Strome and Silfverberg or something like that. What I do think is for the Lundestrom situation, it affects players like Bo Gruel and Nathan Gaucher to some extent. I think Gaucher, a lot of it's going to depend on his preseason and his rookie camp and everything and how he does. He'll still have to earn that roster spot, and it doesn't necessarily open up a spot for him. But I think for Bo Gruel, because he is similar and the fact that he can play all 3 forward positions like Isac Lundestrom, he's a great penalty killer. He fills a similar role to that. He's marinated a bit more in the AHL than somebody like obviously Gaucher will be a rookie in the American Hockey League this season. I think it drastically impacts his chances in Bo Gruel to make the roster. And I think down the road, with Lundestrom being out 6 months and eventually the Ducks likely moving on from someone like Adam Henrique, Lundestrom being out and that potential of moving Henrique opens up possibilities for Gaucher down the road, or Perreault, or Tracy, or Pastuov, or any of the young forwards in San Diego, depending on how their seasons are going. There's an additional roster spot for them to come up and take, right? Especially when there's no guarantee Brett Leason is going to play 82 games. There's no guarantee Brock McGinn or Sam Carrick or even Silfverberg or even Max Jones are going to be 82-game players, right? So there's a lot of potential for guys to jump in. The only spots you could say are guaranteed are Zegras, Terry, Henrique for now, Vetrano, Strome, Killorn, and Mason McTavish, right? So there's 7 spots there. That leaves 5 available roster spots for young players, and not to start the year for sure, but like if Pastuov's playing great, if Perreault's having a good season, if Tracy's playing really well, if Gaucher's playing really well, and guys at the NHL level in Silfverberg or Jones or McGinn, Carrick, Leason aren't, it's very easy to call these guys up, slot them in, and see how they can do. So I do think Lundestrom not being in the lineup for the first 6 months is incentive to some of these guys to say, hey, instead of 4 slots, there's 5 that are available now. 5 chances for us to jump into the lineup. So I think it affects them a bit more than Leo Carlson per se.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, I think we talked about this earlier in the summer, end of last season, but this is going to be the year where a lot of guys are going to have to really stake their claim. Comtois already moved on. Steele has already moved on. You've got guys like Jones and, Lundestrom lost a little bit of time here. But Perreault and Tracy and Gru, like those guys are going to, Nestorenko probably is going to get a real nice look here. Like
Yep.
this, I think you're right that maybe this creates more of an opportunity for some of the tweeners than maybe some of the sexier names like fans would like. Even including Gaucher, right? I don't think there's any reason to say he shouldn't just go be the first line center or second line center in San Diego for, the year. And maybe he comes up at the end or something like that. But getting to spend that time working with, oh my God, why can't I remember the coach's name right now in San Diego? McElvain, thank you. And going working down with him, and that guy's a development guy. And, like we've talked about him with his time in Red Bull. So I think you're absolutely right, actually. I think that's a great point. I do think it probably creates more opportunities for those tweener guys. I still think we probably see one of these forwards get moved out before the season or within the first little bit of the season. I just still think there are a few too many names that aren't really all that important to the, you know what I mean? Like you get like Leeson, like he's fine. I have no problem with him if he plays 82 games. That's fine. But I think that there's no real upside there beyond he's a perfectly fine fourth line winger. So I think Sam Carrick is probably better suited on a more maybe a contending team where he can kind of go and be just a fourth line staple. You know what I mean? Like, again, I just think I'd rather see Tracy get those minutes. I'd maybe rather see Nestorenko get those minutes or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see. But I do think we're still going to probably see one more guy get moved on from.
So what you're saying is you still see a spot for Thomas Tatar on this team. I get it.
Yeah, exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
He's going to play center for Willie Nylander.
Still not signed.
Zach Parise, by the way, did you see that tweet today? That we're a Zach Parise over Thomas Tatar podcast?
Oh boy, I didn't see that one. Good thing I didn't see that one.
It's because you don't pay attention to me anymore.
Oh. Zach Parise over Thomas Tatar?
Yeah, American hero Zach Parise. Instead of
is he an unrestricted free agent right now?
He's still that's what made me think of it. Somebody tweeted out that he's unsigned, but he had his first 20-goal season last year for like the first time since like 17-18 or something like that.
I've always been a Zach Parise fan when he was in
there's nothing not to like about the guy,
man. So I wouldn't hate
apparently
it.
Ryan Suter was the asshole in Minnesota, so that makes me feel even better about it.
Oh, okay, I could see it. Lyubushkin. We got an August trade. Ilya Lybushkin for a 2025 fourth-round pick, which was Minnesota's pick from the Klingberg trade. So as you've written here, the Klingberg trade is now complete. It's now Klingberg for Nestorenko, Suster, and Lyubushkin. So Nestorenko and Lyubushkin, because Suster is no longer part of the Ducks organization anymore. It is what it is. We never got the first-round pick we hoped for John Klingberg, but the thing that's crazy for me is it's not the trade. It is what it is. You're bringing in a bigger physical defenseman. We've seen Gudas and Hag come in, and now Lyubushkin comes in. There's a trend for what Verbeek wanted to add to this blue line for this upcoming season, so it's not like it deviates from that plan. It is the uproar that we saw, I was going to say on Twitter, but I guess on X, of the fact that this means that we're not going to see Mintyukov and Zellweger and those guys for this, and Helleson and Lacombe for this upcoming season, because now the Ducks defense is going to look like Fowler, Drysdale, Hag, Gudas, Vakanainen, and Lyubushkin, with Colton White as the number 7 option, and then Scott Harrington, who just signed a PTO, who will likely be kind of the other tweener there, the number 8 option. So that leaves Helleson, Lacombe, Mintyukov, Zellweger, Tyson Hines, and Noah Warren is listed here, but he likely goes back to the queue. So Hines, Zellweger, Mintyukov, Lacombe, and Hellison all to be in San Diego. That caused a major uproar on, I'm still going to call it Twitter, which is ridiculous to me because, you know what? Without the comments from Pat Verbeek, it is what it is. These guys have not played pro hockey before. We're all very high on Pavel Mintyukov and Nolan Zellweger and the bunch of being close to NHL ready. But Pat Verbeek, about a week before this, had some comments that I think it was either on the Ducks website or through an interview or through an article where he was asked about this directly. And he said he does not see these guys getting any significant time in the NHL, if any, this year. And the plan is to play them in the AHL and ease their transition slowly into pro hockey and see what they can do and not give them too much too soon. Despite everybody seeing those comments and commenting on them themselves and making their opinions known on them, there was still a significant portion of the Ducks fan base on the app that went nuts over Lyubushkin coming in and taking a roster spot from these guys. So that was my favorite part of this, is not Lyubushkin coming in and what he can offer to this team. The fact that all the talk was he is eating up Olen Zellweger's minutes in the NHL this season.
Yeah, I would say I
tread lightly, right?
So it's funny because, like, the other thing about it that makes me kind of laugh, I guess, is like he said the same fucking thing last summer. Like, explicitly, his first summer in, he said, I do not want to rush anybody. I would rather these guys overcook than undercook. Said the same thing again this summer, specifically about all these young defensemen we're so excited for. I think it was easy to look at the Gudis signing and the Killorn signing and some of the progress from McTavish and be, oh, maybe they might be a little bit more aggressive this summer. But then you remember there's the John Gibson rumors. You don't move on from a guy who can be a starting goaltender if you think you can convince him to stay from being, or by being, a more competitive team. You don't go out and sign Alex Delak if that's what you're trying to do. You know, hell, I'm not 100% convinced you draft Leo Carlsson over Adam Fantilli if you're trying to be competitive sooner than later. Because we all know Adam Fantilli is going to walk into the league next year. Like, he's going to be on that Columbus roster. So, you know, I think sorry, I keep getting the chills. I think some of that is just a little silly because it also makes sense. These guys, there just aren't a lot of guys who can go straight from junior to the pros. It's a very hard thing. Olen Zellweger is like 4.5 feet tall. Pavel Mintyukov has some refining he needs to do to his defensive game. You know, I mean, that's something we talked about with Scott, is that he was just such a free-willing attacking defenseman, not last year, but the year before, that there was going to need to be some refinement to his game. Noah Warren is coming off an injury. Drew Hellison looked good, but he certainly doesn't look like he can just be a top 4 guy. Jackson Lacombe looked good. Doesn't look like he can just be a top 4 guy. You know, I don't see where the rest of this roster's potential upside is, other than maybe, right, 2 young defensemen. So I think there's just a lot of it that is a bit of fantasy casting from the fan base.
Yep.
We've seen more than a few people say they're kind of fucking done rooting for a bad team and they would like the team to be better again. I think fans are a little spoiled.
Yeah.
I don't think, I don't think it's fair to say that the last couple of years under Bob Murray, where the team was bad, should count towards this team's window or perception of their tanking. As good as Trevor Zegras looks like he's going to be, or can be, he was taken 10th. That's not they didn't draft 10th because they thought they were going to be bad. They drafted 10th because they sucked when they thought they should have been better. So, I just think there needs to be some more patience. The thing for me that fucking killed me about this was it's an overpay for a 4th-round draft pick. Ilya Lybushkin is exactly what you hope your 4th-round draft pick becomes.
Yep.
I tweeted about this the other day, or X'd about this the other day, or whatever the fuck it was. I like that you just call it the app.
Yeah,
I think
it's the
that's
app
way
now.
more fun. It's the app. But I talked about it on the app. The Ducks have made 28 4th-round draft picks counting last year. Of those, only 2 of them have played over 100 games. It was Matt Bolesky, and the other one was, oh my God, my brain is completely shutting off right now. I can't remember, but it was just like another perfectly fine depth player. And it's just, that's just what it is. Like, you're not likely to get something out of it. And if you can turn that draft pick into a player who can fill a role on this team, that's perfectly fine. They're not short of draft picks. They're not mortgaging the future for anything. Like, they still have 2 seconds and 3/3 this coming year, or the other way around, maybe 3 seconds and 2/3. But like, there is still 2 seconds and 3/3. Yeah, this year. So they have 1 first, 2 seconds, 3/3, and then all their other picks for the next 3 years. They traded a pick. They got in a trade. Like, there isn't any shortage of assets to be aggressive. There isn't any shortage of assets to make these kinds of picks. Like, this didn't cost them anything, and it fills a very specific hole on this roster that is going to help stop some of the bleeding right now. And for a fan base that wants to see Lukas Dostal get more starts, this is more valuable than that fucking pick, because he's going to be able to come in and play defense and block shots and move guys around and help clean up some of the issues that this team had last year, where their whole defense core just kept getting pushed around all fucking year. I love Jamie Drysdale. So excited for what he's going to be, can be, all that. He doesn't solve that issue. So him coming back doesn't actually help that. It fixes other issues, and I'm, again, very excited. But if a 4th-round pick means Lukas Dostal's a little bit more room in that crease, I'm fine with paying that. I don't see how that's an overpay. I don't see how that's a wasted asset. I don't see how the opportunity cost here is so significant that it's worth being up in arms about.
Yeah, and the thing for me, too, is take Helleson out of the mix. There's a grand total of 2 professional games played between Lacombe, Michkov, Zellweger, and Tyson Hines. And 2 of them go to Jackson Lacombe in the 2 games he played for the Ducks at the end of last season. Drew Helleson has 65 games in the American Hockey League and 3 in the NHL all of last season. That's it. That's the pro resume for all of these guys. That's not to say they aren't talented or successful enough to make it, but to say that they're taking an NHL spot from these guys, I think, is very, very premature for guys who haven't played outside of the junior level yet. I'm very high on Olen Zellweger. I do think he could play next year. I don't think any of these guys stand in their way. Other than if you want to say it's harder to take Lyubushkin out of the lineup because he makes $2.75 million, fine. Make that your argument.
But who is he blocking? None of these prospects play on the fucking right side other than Drew Helleson.
No. And regardless, Robert Hagg's on a league minimum. There is absolutely no guarantee he plays 5-10 games for the Ducks next year if things go south and if the prospects start very well in San Diego and prove that they are way better than that level and can come up. They're not going to say, oh, well, listen, we're paying Robert Hagg $750,000, so you got to stay in the AHL. We're not going to bring you up. No. There is absolutely every chance that Zellweger starts with 10 points in the first 5 games in San Diego, and they say, listen, we have no choice but to call you up. Sorry, Robert Hagg, you're off the roster for this time, for these games. And for the more physical games, the harder games they expect, where maybe Zellweger will get pushed around, okay, he's out for that game. Hagg's in for those games. There's nothing wrong with that. Same can be said for Minchikov and Tyson Hines and whatever, Urho Vakanainen. There is no guarantee, one, that he doesn't re-injure himself because he's coming back from 6 months off for the hip surgery, or that he even stays at the NHL level this year because he can easily get sent down to San Diego.
I'm not sure Urho Vakanainen plays 20 NHL games this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even an injury thing. I just don't think there's enough there to say he's going to be on this roster for sure. There's just not enough there.
It's Colton White, who can
Who's
say
fine.
the exact same thing for him. There's no guarantee he plays 20-plus games for the Ducks this year. And then Scott Harrington, who's on a PTO. So even if he does sign his league minimum, and there's no guarantee that he plays a significant amount of games in Anaheim and that he stops Minchikov or Zellweger or whoever from coming up from the American Hockey League. The only guys who are blocking them from coming up are Cam Fowler, Jamie Drysdale, and Radko Gudas, and maybe Ilya Lybushkin now. That's it. And it's only Lyubushkin in there because the amount of money he makes, you really don't want to sit him on the sidelines when you're paying him that much money. That's it.
Sure, but here's the thing. They can fucking trade him again.
That's my next point there is that he's on a 1-year deal.
Him.
So maybe for the first 40 to 45 games he's there, you're letting Minchikov play 40-plus games in the AHL. You're letting Zellweger play 40-plus games in the AHL. Nothing wrong with that. Trade deadline comes along. These guys are performing at a high level at the AHL. They're ready to come up for a second-half run with the Ducks. Lyubushkin's out the door for a 4th-round pick, 5th-round pick at the deadline, and you're bringing up Zellweger to play the second half of the season. You're bringing up Minchikov to play the second half of the season, right? So then, really long-term, there's only 3 guys on the roster that are guarantees, and that's Fowler, Gudas, and Drysdale. That's it. So there's nobody blocking it. So I want to put this ridiculous stuff to rest that they're blocking roster spots, and these moves shouldn't be made because the underlying numbers for Lyubushkin aren't great. And Minchikov and Zellweger and Lacombe and Hellison and Hines should all be given chances. I love to see the young kids get chances for sure. For me, there is nothing wrong with bringing in cheap guys who have proven they can play at the NHL level, whether it's 10, 15, 20, 30, 82 games. They can play, they have played, they've been brought into different systems, and they've played. I have no problem starting the season with those guys that have shown they can at least keep up with the pace at the NHL level rather than throwing our young kids into the fire with absolutely no cover so that if they do struggle, there's nobody to take that position. I'm much more comfortable having Lyubushkin, Hag, Vakanainen, Harrington, and Colton White as our starters to start the year and letting Minchikov and Zellweger and Hines and everybody, Hellison and Lacombe, start in the AHL, get some pro games under their belt, make sure they're up to speed to start the season, and see how they do at that level. And if they play their way onto the NHL roster, there's none of those guys are standing in their way that Verbeek and the Ducks are going to be like, listen, we got to keep you down at the AHL level. Nobody is going to Hag, Vakanainen, White, Lyubushkin, Harrington are not standing in their way of coming up if they deserve to come up. It's just not going to be the case. You can't be that delusional to think that if Zellweger starts or Minchikov starts at a point-per-game plus pace at the American Hockey League level for the first 10, 15 games, that they're not going to be called up because Robert Hagg is playing second pair for this team or third pair for this team. There's no chance.
Yeah, no.
It's insane.
And I think the thing for me is I would rather make this trade now than the middle of December.
Yeah.
I just don't see what the downside is.
You just can see why it makes sense they made this now. It's to give
There's
cover
that's the thing
for the
me,
young
I
kids.
think.
It's just to give cover for the young kids and bring in a guy that they know can play at the NHL level. That's all it is. And it's not a long-term move. It's a short-term move. And the worst-case scenario is the kids aren't ready, and you've got Lyubushkin playing NHL minutes rather than Zellweger, who's not ready. And you're hurting his development. That's the worst-case scenario, is that the Ducks are still bad, and instead of hurting Zellweger or the kids' development, you're just playing Lyubushkin instead. That's the worst case scenario.
And again, let's be very clear here. And I am going to say this, and you don't even have to agree with me or whatever. I don't know. This is going to piss people off. There is exactly one player on this roster right now who is, quote unquote, standing in the way of Minchikov and Zellweger getting the minutes and roles that they deserve, assuming they're perfect studs like we think they are. It's fucking Cam Fowler.
Yeah.
First power play, first pair. Though that's the guy who, in theory, if these young guys are as ready as people want them to be or as impactful as people want them to be, that's the guy. I go back to this every fucking time, and maybe one day I'll get over it and drop it, but probably not. The reason they traded Shea Theodore was because they had Cam Fowler. That is the reason they felt comfortable making that decision. Shea Theodore stylistically was closer to Cam Fowler. Nobody was mistaking him for a Hampus Lindholm type. He was the left-hand side. They looked at that roster and said, Lindholm and Fowler are our top two lefty for the next 6 years. Those are our guys. And then they made that decision. Cam Fowler is the guy who could prevent, in theory, a Minchikov or a Zellweger from getting the minutes and the role and the place in the lineup that they should hopefully become. That's
in
it.
a best case scenario, yeah.
In a-
If they were they were superstars this season, Cam Fowler is the one in the way. If both of them are ready,
And
to do
they're
that.
just not. They're just not gonna win the fucking Norris as rookies.
Yeah.
That's just not gonna happen. And there's nothing.
Let alone both of
wrong.
them, right? Like
Right,
we're
yeah.
talking if both of them were ready. If one of them is ready, there's a spot for him, and it's in the second pair.
Yeah.
But if God forbid both of them were jumping into the league at the highest ceiling we expect from them, then yes, it's Cam Fowler who's standing in the way. Nobody else.
And
Like,
I'm
that's
not
the
even
thing.
saying this to be a dickhead to Cam Fowler, which is kind of my whole thing. It's more of just we have to be honest about what this team is, where these players fit in, and you're 100% right. Nobody is fucking keeping kids in the minors because of right-hand third-pair defenseman Ilya Lybushkin or left-hand third-pair defenseman Robert Hagg. Those guys are going to be able to fill roles and do things, and it's going to be fine. They're not going to prevent these kids who are the second coming of fucking Nick Lidstrom, apparently, from being able to be these superstar guys on entry-level contracts. It's just not happening. It's just such an absurd, it was such an absurd reaction to me to see the way people talked about the Ilya Lybushkin trade when, again, maybe it's my bias, whatever. It's all fucking upside. There's no downside to the trade.
Yeah.
You traded away a 4th-round pick that more than likely won't become anything. It's it's 2 years from now. You can get another 2025 4th-round pick. It's not going to be hard. Hell, you can trade Ilya Lybushkin for it if you want. There's just nothing about this move that should have elicited the type of reaction that it did. And I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't get it. I feel like the fact that it was a trade it elicited more of a reaction than if it was just a signing, right? Like the fact that you gave up a 4th-round pick, people just went nuts. And again, without the comments from Pat Verbeek, I still think this is an overreaction. But I can at least be like, okay, well, I know everybody wanted the kids to play, and we haven't heard anything about the kids playing or not, and this indicates that they're not, and I'm a little upset. But the fact that a week, maybe 2 weeks prior to that, we had Verbeek doubling down saying these kids aren't going to play at the NHL to start the season, if not, maybe not the entire season. We had that out and it wasn't even speculation. It was him. It was directly quoted from him saying that's going to be the case. And then we sign Lyubushkin to play, or we trade for Lyubushkin to play at the NHL level, and it's on trend with the players that we brought in on defense, and Hagg and Gudis and now Harrington, that there was such an outrage from it. It made no sense that It was following up comments where he said the kids aren't going to play. It was on trend with the physical signings on defense that we've made. And people still looked at it and said, they're blocking minutes from Zellweger and Minchikov who deserve to play. That's the insane thing for me. And I don't want this to all be about that because I do want to talk about Lyubushkin and his impact as well. I do think it makes sense. Again, like I said, with the signings we've had on defense, like there is a clear need to address some physicality on the blue line. And I think Verbeek's done almost the best job he can and bringing in guys who can address that. He's brought in Gudas, who is the hits leader in the NHL among defensemen. He brought in Hag, who I think was top 10 in hits per game in the NHL last season. You bring in Lyubushkin, who's maybe not the biggest hitter, but he plays a physical style of game, right? Like he is a bit of a rough and tumble type defenseman as well. So you bring those guys in. You bring Harrington on a PTO, who's a bigger guy as well. And you've clearly addressed that need. Gudas being obviously the high-profile one, and the rest of the three being kind of depth guys beyond that. But all it did was cost you cap space and a fourth-round pick to bring in four guys to get that done. And the Ducks have plenty of cap space to make that work. So, listen, I like the signing. I think it's going to be a good fit to start the year. And like we said, the worst-case scenario is you trade him at or near the deadline, and one of the young guys in the AHL is ready to come up and take his spot. That's the worst-case scenario. That doesn't sound like a bad thing to me. When the worst case is the kids get some time in the AHL, it can come up, and you get an asset back for Lyubushkin, and it maybe is another fourth-round pick, so you didn't really give up anything at all to just have some cover and some peace of mind that the kids can get some time in the AHL and not have to be forced to play on a bad team and play bad at the NHL level and ruin their development. My gosh, that is the worst possible thing that could happen.
Look, he's going to come in. He's going to play a stay-at-home type role. He's going to be physical around the net. He's going to block shots. He's going to play on the penalty kill. He's going to get 15 minutes a night. Like, he's just going to be exactly what you need him to be. Mm-hmm. There's nothing like, I'm sorry, I don't want Jamie Drysdale playing on the fucking penalty kill. It doesn't do him any good.
Yeah.
I don't really want Cam Fowler. I don't even really want Cam Fowler on the penalty kill. Yeah. Now you've got Gudas, you've got Lyubushkin, you're going to have Hag. Okay, fine. Then you can throw the other one out there as Colton White or Cam Fowler, and that's fine.
Back in that in somebody.
Yeah,
we didn't even talk about how that covers Drysdale too. We talked all about how it protects the kids from not having to get thrust into the NHL before they're ready. It allows the Ducks to have some more flexibility with Drysdale.
And his deployment, absolutely.
His rookie season, he was playing PK1, PK2 a lot of times. And power play, and 5-on-5, and we saw how that was a lot for him to handle. And
He's still not fucking Charlie McAvoy, man. Like, you can't just throw him out there like that.
And he had a good rookie season, all things considered, and then obviously last year he couldn't play. You think this year, okay, now you can work him into still being a power play guy and playing 5-on-5 minutes, but he doesn't have to touch the penalty kill at all, and he can just focus on the offensive side of his game. And you've got a coach in there who will help him out with the defensive side, but he doesn't have to get thrust onto the penalty kill because the Ducks have absolutely nobody else to play there. They have guys now who can play penalty kill, who are actually penalty kill specialists, and he doesn't have to do that. So not only does it help the kids and that they don't have to come up before they're ready, it helps the one kid we have in the lineup still, and Jamie Drysdale is going to be coming back from injury and missing an entire season, that he can ease his way into action. And they can kind of baby his minutes a little bit, which I think is exactly what he needs coming into this situation, and will be his second full season in the NHL, coming back from an injury that caused him to miss the entire season. It's not going to be an easy and quick restart for Jamie Drysdale, and the worst thing they could have done is not had players in place to take and ease that role for him and throw him into 25 plus minutes a night in all situations.
No, exactly. He's going to get to just be John Klingberg last year. Mm-hmm. Generate offense at 5-on-5, generate offense on the penalty of the power play. Yep. That's all we need you to do. That's what we want you to focus on. Be the best version of you that you can be. Carry the puck out of the net. Create offensive opportunities. That's what we're going to need. We're going to have these other guys be here. And they're going to take care of some of the other stuff. Like, I don't know, man. I like the Lyubushkin trade. I really like it. I think it solves a very clear problem. It provides cover for younger players, for the roster in general, for the fucking goaltenders who were getting eaten alive last year with 7 guys on the ice in front of them at all times. Like, I just think, he just fits a very specific type and role. He's not going to. I mean, yeah, like, sure. Worst case, somehow he's playing 20 minutes a night. But, like, look, man, if he's playing 20 minutes a night, we're getting Celebrini. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, that's just the way that's going to go. So, I just don't see it as being a significant issue. And, I think with Gudis and Hellison and Warren and Drysdale, there's really even no fucking concern that he's going to get extended. He's likely going to get traded.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So he's going to come in. He's going to do exactly what you think he's going to do, and then he's going to be gone. And everybody's going to just remember, oh yeah, it was actually not a big deal that they traded away Minnesota's fucking 4th-round pick 2 drafts from now.
Yeah.
To bring this guy in to play 15 minutes a night.
Everybody's going to
games.
forget about it when he's moved out and the kid who comes up to take his place is one of the kids we're high on. And they get to come in.
Here's the other thing. The actual worst case scenario, which again isn't really that bad, is that they take back a defensive body. Similar to the oh my god, I want to say not Hakanpää. It was a Corbinian Holzer, where they traded Corbinian Holzer and brought back Matt Irwin.
Yep.
And they just bring back another vet for 5 minutes, and he plays, 15 games or whatever the shit. Or they claim somebody off waivers like they did with Scott Harrington. Like, It's just, there's no downside here. There's just not any downside. And to generate or create this idea that things are being lost here, there's this significant opportunity cost to this trade is absurd.
Yeah, you can really break apart that argument very quickly when you go through the scenarios, right?
Right.
We talked about, okay, well, if the kids or one of the kids or multiple kids in the AHL on defense start off hot and they play their way into a position where they have to get called up, there's enough guys that you could say, okay, well, you're not playing, and these kids are coming up to play. There's nobody blocking them from doing that. If they don't play well and they're struggling in the AHL, you now have a safety net in front of them that you don't have to play them at the NHL level. They have time to adjust. You can work on their development at the AHL level, and you have that safety net of Hag and Harrington and White and Lyubushkin in front of them and Vakanainen that you can say, okay, we have time, and these kids can develop down with a developmental coach in McIlvain, and we don't have to bring them up. You could trade Lyubushkin down the season if they figure things out and they're playing better. And if they're not playing better at that point and none of them are ready to come up, like you said, you can move Lyubushkin out and bring a body back. You can trade for another body on defense to come in. You can keep Lyubushkin at the end of the season, and even if you lose him for nothing, it was just a 4th-round pick, and you help development for your young players. Or you can take somebody off waivers. The 10 to 15 players that will get put on waivers near the trade deadline of 7th or 8th spot defenseman that you could say, okay, we're going to get Lyubushkin out the door for a 5th round or a 4th round pick, and we're just going to claim this guy off waivers. He's going to take his spot. Like, it really is not a bad situation to be in, and it's the off-season kind of blues to sit here and find something to talk about and complain about, that this is what we have picked up on, that people are this upset over Ilya Lybushkin coming in for a 4th-round pick. It's just the timing of it. If this happened at the draft or in the middle of the season, we wouldn't be batting an eye at it because we'd have stuff to back it up for why this trade is happening. With it happening in August and the hype around the prospects and everything really being about the young players at this point in time, it's just taken on a whole new level where people have gone to just a weird place with it.
Yeah. It's funny to watch people turn on Pat Verbeek so fucking quick. Just absurd. So,
all right. Well, what do we got left?
Young players?
Yeah. Who we going here?
All right. So speaking of young players, Elite Prospects put out their ranking of the top 100 affiliated prospects
Okay.
The stipulations for this was it had to be a player who would be Calder eligible for the upcoming season.
Mm-hmm.
So
like McTavish not in, guys like that.
McTavish not in, but also Leno, Pastujov, some of these guys who haven't signed contract, or maybe Pastujov is, but I don't think so. But like some of these guys who haven't technically signed their ELCs yet aren't even included. These are guys who I believe have all signed their ELCs
So
based on the name
Michkov not
size.
included as well then, guys like that.
Oh, no. Okay, so Michkov is involved.
Okay.
Michkov is number 4. But I think he signed his ELC. Oh, no, he couldn't have.
He can't. He's, KHL
Interesting.
eligible.
I don't know. Well, then that makes this a little bit more interesting. But it had to be guys who would be eligible for the Calder this year. So we're going to go bottom or 100 down. The first one they released was 100 to 51. Ian Moore was an honorable mention, and Jackson Lacombe finished in at number 72. Number 73 was Toronto defenseman Topi Niemela, and number 71 was Jagger Firkus, the right wing associated with Seattle. Jackson Lacombe, 72nd best prospect going into this season. How do you feel about that, Edward?
It's I guess surprising. Again, like I like Jackson Lacombe, but to say he's the 72nd best prospect in the league is a little bit surprising for me. I would probably had him in the honorable mentions section, but he's made strides. He had a good, 2 games, I think, at the end of the season in Anaheim, and he's looked good at the University of Minnesota over the last 4 years. So, I'm happy about it. I mean, it's great that other people are high on him. I need to see more though. I wouldn't have had him in a top 100. I would have taken players that I haven't seen play yet, or haven't seen play as long as Lacombe and maybe a little bit more higher upside than him. I think Lacombe is a safer option. I think he's got more projectability to say he's an NHL player at this point, but I definitely would say there's other prospects that have a higher potential upsides, even if there's more risk involved. But great to see it, man. Like to say he's the 4th best prospect in the Ducks pool according to this list is a bit wild. But obviously we know, Leno is not included in this, and a few others are included in this as well. So that does slide him down the list potentially. What if those prospects, not just from the Ducks and other teams, were included, that he would slide down a bit. But
JD Burke, who is the editor-in-chief of Elite Prospects, I talked to him on the app, and I was like surprised to see Lacombe as high as he is. Certainly an encouraging sign. And he said, we've always had a ton of time for Lacombe's game, Mitch Brown especially. He's taken some huge steps forward in his development since going to Minnesota, and we're looking forward to seeing what he can do as a pro. They're very high on him. They think he's got a lot there. So that's really exciting. And like I said, he's between Jagger Firkus, who, again, if he was 2 inches taller, would have gone in the top 20 last year. I think he ended up going in the early second or mid-second or something like that. But Jagger Firkus' biggest issue was that he was short.
Yeah.
And Topi Niemela is a guy that I think a lot of
people had a lot of time for him at the draft.
Toronto fans are going to be pinning their hopes on. He's kind of their big right D prospect that's not really in the league.
And he had a good season in Europe as well. So yeah, it's great for Lacombe. I think the thing with Lacombe, even when he was drafted, is that he's drafted out of high school and the offense was there, and he was one of those guys who transitioned from forward to defense. So it was, when he goes to college, is he going to be able to work on the defensive side of the game? And he 100% has done that, and the offense hasn't fallen off a cliff while doing so. So there's a lot of potential for him heading into this season. The biggest thing for me for Lacombe, and I'm still waiting to see, obviously, because we need more games to the NHL level, is how is it all going to transition to the pro game? And it's great to see a lot of people a lot smarter than me in this, thinking that he has the ability to do that, and they're ranking him this highly in doing so. I would love to break down that list sometime and see where he ranks among defensemen on that list to get kind of a better picture of his standing among other defensemen, because obviously you have it listed here. Michkov was at 10 and Zellweger is at 15. So it'd be interesting to see how many other defensemen are kind of in that range. Yeah,
no, for sure, 100%. And so that was the thing, right? Because obviously they released it 100 to 51, 50 to 26, 25 to 1. When I saw Lacombe at 72, I was like, oh my God, like I can't wait to see where Tristan Luneau and Zellweger and all these guys are going to finish, even like maybe Tyson Hines. So to not see some of those guys on this list, I thought was very interesting. But it also, I think, like you said, Olin Zellweger came in at 15th on their list. 16th is Chicago forward Frank Nazar, and 14th was Philly forward Cutter Gauthier. Cutter Gauthier went 4th overall in the Pavel Mintyukov draft.
Yep.
Um,
and Nazar, again, the Jaeger Fergus effect. If he was 2 inches taller, he would be thought of a lot higher.
And, Frank Nazar is a guy I have a ton of time for. I think he's going to be special. I really, really do. I think he's so smart and he works so hard. Like, he's got the skill and the smarts, but I think the thing that makes him kind of over the top is that work rate. So to see Olin Zellweger be right in between those two guys who look almost locks for top 6 forwards is so incredibly exciting. And again, number 15, man, that's not anything to sneeze at.
Yeah, and that's got to be top 3, top 4 among defensemen in that range too, because I imagine the majority of those top 15 are forwards.
Yeah, it's definitely been pretty high.
Because Jiricek's probably in there. Clark
Jiricek. Brant
Hughes
Clark,
might be in there,
I think, was in the 20s. He was higher than Brant Clark.
Oh, wow.
I think Brant Clark was
probably
at 22.
In there.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it.
Yeah,
we can maybe
but it's got to be like
names.
top 5 probably in that case with Jiricek and Hughes and maybe another player possibly being higher than those two. But in that mix for sure. And again, the size thing is probably what keeps him down at 15 for Zellweger.
Sure. I mean, if he was 6'1", I don't even know that we're like the Ducks don't even get him, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't make it.
He does not make it to that point.
Then comes Pavel Mintyukov, who came in at number 10, and his positioning I thought was very interesting. Number 11 was Ryan Leonard, who was just drafted by Washington.
Wow. Okay.
7th overall, just after Mintyukov went to Philly. Mm-hmm. And 9 was Simon Edvinsson of Detroit.
Okay, so he's on that list too. Okay.
And I thought he was interesting because Simon Edvinsson is someone that I think a lot of prospect people are obviously very high on, but I think also are looking at him as the next kind of linchpin for what Detroit can be. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy I think that they're hoping maybe, him and Seider are the two guys that they build that blue line around moving forward. And so to see Mintyukov, who doesn't have the kind of defensive reputation that Simon Edvinsson has, I think Simon Edvinsson is a much more steady defensive presence, very much that kind of safe, not safe, but just like really reliable upside, right?
Mm-hmm. He's got a more well-rounded defensive game. Whereas Mintyukov's a bit more explosive on the offensive side. Yeah,
I think that's a very interesting thing to see him between Ryan Leonard and Simon Edvinsson. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then finally, Leo Carlsson came in at number 3 between Matvei Mintyukov and Adam Fantilli.
And Bedard has to be number 1, right?
So, yeah, Bedard was number 1.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
hey, man, that's a good shout. No, it's a good shout for Carlsson. To be there, I mean, you have to assume you knew before this list even came out that it was going to be Bedard, Fantilli at 1-2, but there's a lot of other ways
over Cooley, over Smith, over Mintyukov, like.
Yep, no, 100%. I think Carlsson at 3 speaks volumes to how elite prospects think of him. I think Mintyukov being at 10. I know EP has always been very high on Mintyukov. I think he was their highest ranked defenseman in that draft. So it makes sense. I can't remember.
It would have been him or Korchinski.
Yeah. I was Korchinski in the top 10 on this, or?
No, I think Korchinski. I don't know. I'll look it up. We'll tweet it out after. I don't
We'll
want
have to see.
kill
I mean, I
airtime
am
staring at
interested
this
to
thing.
see. I want to see this list after and see who the ranking of the defensemen, because I want to see. Obviously, Edmondson was in there. I guarantee Juracek's in there. I'm interested to see if any other defensemen were in that 1 to 15 range, or I guess 4 or 5 to 15 range, because we know the top 4. So I would think Juracek would be in there. Edmondson's in there. Maybe Luke Hughes is in there, but he could be one of those guys that's excluded because they've played NHL games. So it'd be interesting to see that. But yeah, no surprise that the three big names for the Ducks that are there are Carlson, Minchikov, and Zellweger. Like that, by far and away, the top 3 prospects the Ducks have in their pool. And the next closest are, as good as they are nowhere near that level right now. And that's Luneau and Pastuov and Lacombe and those guys. There's a major tier difference between the projections and potential for Zellweger, Minchikov, and Leo Carlson. So it's great to see them recognized in that level. And we get to potentially see all of them at some point next season, which is exciting.
Yeah. So number 5, real quick, I brought it up. Logan Cooley. Number 6, Zach Benson. Number 7 is Juracek. 8 is Luke Hughes. 9 is Edmondson. 10 is Pavel Minchikov. So he's the 4th best defensive prospect, according to them.
Any other defenseman between him and Zellweger?
Leonard Smith, Wright, Gauthier, Zellweger. Nope.
So 4 and 5 then. So it's Juracek,
The
Hughes,
next
Edmondson,
is
Minchikov,
Reinbacher
Zellweger.
at 18, Nemec at 19, Simashev at 20.
Mm-hmm.
They've got Simashev over Kurchinski, which is fast. Oh my God, they've got Matachuk at 24, Brant Clark at 25.
That was the wild one for me, because I know a lot of people are high on Brant Clark.
But man, his skating is so fucking sketch.
Yep. Yeah.
His skating is so sketch.
It's the
I can understand
know exactly
why
he's
hold
there.
you back.
It's the projection of him from junior to the NHL and how much is that, because he's a dynamic offensive player at junior level, but being, you don't have to be a dynamic skater at the junior level if your skill's there. Skill's always going to outshine everything else, but you get really found out quickly if you're not a great skater at the next level. So I can see it for sure, but it speaks volumes to the Ducks prospect pool when Elite Prospects has them as having 2 of the top 5 defensemen in the league in terms of prospects, and they're very close ranked, right? Like it's Juracek, Hughes, Edmondson, Minchikov, Zellweger, right? So it is very, very, very close, and those are some elite names in front of them, and guys that have deservedly so are in front of where Minchikov and Zellweger are at this point. Juracek, Hughes, and Edmondson have all produced at the AHL level already. So to have them where they are makes sense, and you could see Minchikov and Zellweger moving in front of them depending on how they do in their first pro season this year. So it's a great spot to be in. And man, those are, for me, with taking Leo Carlson out of the picture, the 2 guys I'm most excited to see going into this year and seeing how they do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say I'm still really excited about Pastuov. I want to see what he can do wherever he is next year. I think he said he's going to be in San Diego, and I'm just very excited to see what he can do with some coaching and some solid support. He's a player I have a lot of time for just because of his skill set and the way it projects to being a meaningful top 9 player. So, one last thing before we get out of here is the stupid little game I have.
Okay.
So I need something from you, which is I need you to pick a number between 1 and 5.
4.
Okay. Today is 52 days until the season opener.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Jones, who is the 52nd player all time in points for the Anaheim Ducks?
Oh, for the Anaheim Ducks. Oh, my God.
So this is the player ranked 52nd in points for the Anaheim Ducks. And if you want, I can give you a couple of different clues, but I will require you to guess before you get a clue.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll make one guess before I get that. I'm gonna say Emerson Edom.
No. Now, I tried this game out with my uncle, and I was looking up players as I was going, but I'm not going to do that for this. No. This player has 77 career points as a Duck.
All right, I gotta quickly look up how many points Emerson Edom has because I need to see if.
No. You got to put that away. I'll look it up for you.
Okay, you look it up for me. I want to see if I'm. Oh, I'm thinking I'm under. There's no way he has.
Emerson Edom had 31 points in 115 games with Anaheim.
All right, so he had 77 points. This guy, okay.
Yeah.
Matt Beleskey had to have more than that. So.
Matt Beleskey definitely had more than that.
Yeah. Oh man, this is harder than I thought it would be. 52nd, 77
Let's see. 31 Emerson Edom is 116th.
116th. Okay. I'm trying to think of guys who only spent a couple seasons here, or a few seasons here.
Give another guess, and I'll give you another clue. Matt Beleskey had 112. He's 35th all time for Duck scoring.
Okay. I'm trying to go defenseman here. I feel like this guess is I can't do this guess. I can't because I know it's less than Emerson Edom had.
Who are you gonna say?
I was gonna say Sheldon Surrey. I don't know why that was going to my mind.
Now I want to know what Surrey
I just
had.
really hope he has more points than Edom, but I feel like he doesn't. I don't know why that came to my mind.
Please hold. Oh boy, where is Story?
He's way down there, isn't he?
George Peros only has 3 points less than Emerson Edom.
Okay, I was actually thinking of guessing him, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Whoops. Gave that one away for free, eh?
Yeah. So we just can assume Sheldon Surrey is not...
Yeah, I'm trying to find him. So you are right, though. This player is a defenseman.
Oh, okay.
Sheldon Story had 17 points in 44 games.
He had how many?
17 points in 44 games for Anaheim.
44 games? Why did I think he played more? He was one of those guys that stuck around and was injured all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Sheldon Surrey played for 1 year, just 2013, but he did spend some of the year injured. He had 7 goals and 10 assists.
Brandon Montour, did he have?
It is not Brandon Montour. I believe Brandon Montour.
Yeah, more or less.
63. So less. This player had more points than Brandon Montour. I will tell you this. This player played on the team recently.
Oh, man. That actually doesn't help because I was thinking of all guys who'd played a while ago. It's not Spiza.
This player played 212 games with the Anaheim Ducks.
Defenseman recently. Is this Shattenkirk?
It is Kevin Shattenkirk.
Wow.
Nicely done.
I needed a lot of hints for that one. But.
Do you want to try another one? I've got 5 stats. You already did 1. Pick another number 1 through 5 other than 4.
2.
Edward Jones, who is the 52nd player? Who is 52nd in goals for the Anaheim Ducks?
Oh no, 52nd in goals. Josh Manson?
No.
How many goals does this person have?
This person has 26 goals.
How many did Josh Manson have?
I'm looking for that information at the moment. Please hold. Let's see. I'm way too high on this list already. Where the fuck is Manson? Oh shit. Josh Manson is 49th with 26.
Wait, so
This person, Josh Manson is tied.
He's tied. Okay, he's tied.
So
with this
I
guy.
looked this all up earlier.
Yeah.
Josh Manson is tied with this
Alphabetically,
person.
he's not. So
The way that I did it when there were ties were by games played. So the more games you played, the higher up the list I put you.
Okay, so he's got less games played than Josh Manson. Okay. Forward or defenseman?
Guess again.
I don't get a hit off of my Josh Manson guess?
Oh, was that your second guess?
No, it was my first guess. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So
Your answer
Sam
was
Steele?
no. Definitely had Sam Steele has 24. This person is a forward. I will say this person is a winger.
Comtois?
Nope.
He's got to be higher. He had like 26 in one season. In that one good
Comtois had
season.
38 goals and is, according to this at the moment, 38th.
Okay. Recent player?
Recent player.
Recent player.
Very recent.
Very recent. Okay. So that basically means still playing for the team. Okay. Very recent. I get what you're saying here. Okay. Isac Lundestrom?
No. Actually, Lundestrom also is tied it with 26.
No way.
That's hilarious. I feel like you should get credit for getting two guys who are tied with goals. This player was a first-round pick.
Okay, so it's not Sam Steele. It's not Isac Lundestrom, who are also first-round picks. Oh, is it Max Jones?
It is indeed Max Jones, the beauty of all.
Jesus, all these guys at 26. Come on.
That's so funny. All right, man. That'll do it. Well, next time we do this, we'll do the days from the opening night, and we'll do the same thing again. Real quick, fun fact, in case anybody was curious, the 52nd win in Anaheim Ducks history was on October 29th, 1995. They beat the Calgary Flames 7-2. Paul Kariya had 2 goals and an assist.
Yeah.
And the goals were scored by Phil Housley and Dean Evison for Calgary. The 52nd game ever played by the Anaheim Ducks was on January 28th, 1994, where they won 3-2 over the soon-to-be Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers.
Wow.
And I think that did not improve their record very much. I don't think they won like 20 games that year.
I can't.
But yeah, it made me laugh.
Oh, man. Wow.
Games played all time, or 52nd, Kevin Bieksa, 211.
Fuck yeah.
Pims, also Max Jones, 178.
Mr.
My favorite of
52.
all of this, when it comes to just classic remembering some guys shit, 52nd in assists, Pavel Trinka with 47 assists, played from 1998 to 2030.
Oh, my God. We're just throwing out the names now.
I'm
I
telling
would
you,
not
bro.
have got that one. Absolutely no chance I would have gotten that one.
There were, by the way, I'm looking at it, there were 4 different fights in that 7-2 game. Todd Ewan fought Paul Cruz. Then Todd Ewan fought Sandy McCarthy. Joe Sacco fought Trent Ianni. And Todd Simpson fought Pete Doris.
I thought you were going to say Todd Ewan again, as this guy just had a game.
Todd Ewan had 2 fights. Let's see, any other penalties? No, Theo Fleury got an unsportsmanlike conduct in the game. Gary Volk got a game misconduct.
Jeez.
Yeah, Dave Karpa unsportsmanlike. Basically, in the last minute of the game, shit fell into disarray.
This is the first time we've been recording offline where somebody has subscribed to our YouTube right during our recording. So,
oh, word?
yeah, a little ping and the animation popped up on the screen. which makes me miss doing the live stream. So we have to do that. We got to try. I have
We'll
to
get back
try and
into it.
revive that and get my computer working properly.
We'll get it back.
Yeah. The only other thing we missed, Alex Stalock signed a 1-year contract with the Ducks. I missed that when I was gone, and I came back and I looked at Cap Friendly and I saw Stalock's name on the list. I had no idea he signed. But yeah, there's our tweener goalie. So it's Gibson, Stalock, Dostal for next season. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for a little bit. I would imagine the next episode we do is probably some sort of preview or something.
Yeah, either that or the Zegras signing.
Yeah. Hopefully we get that before. And one of the next few episodes we do will be our preview. It'll be likely the same format we normally do. Preview of either each division or the NHL as a whole, with a big kind of deep dive into the Ducks and our projected rosters and what we think the season is going to look like for them. But we'll get as close to the start of the season as we can, just in case there are, like we had talked about a few times on this show, any trades or any other signings or any movement or anything like that. So we'll try and get as close to the season as we can, where we're actually able to still get that out in time.
Yeah, I would expect that the Ducks season preview will be late September, early October. The season starts on the 14th this year.
Yeah.
We have a couple of people we still want to talk to for some season preview stuff. We're definitely going to make sure we get Avery back on here to talk about Canada and the CFL and why Avery secretly has the biggest arms in CFL media. We're going to try to talk to Mike Gould about the Flames and or the Coyotes, who are two teams that are going to have very weird years upcoming, and I'm excited to see kind of what they're going on.
Yep.
So, yeah, we definitely have some stuff we want to try to do, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll be able to sneak some stupid shit in here, too.
Yeah, we always find a way.
Yeah, good stuff. So.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys, for this month's version. A lot more frequent episodes planned for when the season starts, of course. We'll be able to kind of hop on more often than not, less busy than we are during the summer right now, where we can kind of get these out frequently. We'll have a lot more news to cover, obviously, during the season, so back to our kind of normal schedule there. But happy to jump on and actually have 2 hours worth of content to talk about this time. We didn't really have to stretch anything out. We just had enough to talk about this time, which was nice. But always appreciate you guys tuning in, and stay tuned to the app for when we are planning on going live next. And always feel free, if you want any questions answered for the show, or you have anything that you want us to talk about, send it in at any time. You can DM us on Twitter. You can send us a message through Facebook. You can email us through the website. Whatever way is easier for you to contact us, send us in those questions, and we'll talk about it on the next show if we haven't covered it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Talk to you guys soon.
See you guys.